My name is Emma Carter, and I was 32 years old when my whole family turned against me. I stood on my grandfather's front porch holding a cedar chest he had built for me when I was 10 years old. The front door was locked. Not just locked. The lock had been changed. The flowers from Grandpa's funeral had not even started to wilt, and already my parents had replaced the deadbolt. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken everything. The house. The land. The bank accounts. Every piece of the life my grandfather, George Carter, had spent 60 years building. What they didn't know was that Grandpa had left me $20 million in an irrevocable trust. And what happened 7 days after his funeral changed everything I thought I knew about my family. But before I tell you that, you need to understand who George Carter really was. Grandpa built Carter Construction from nothing. When he was 22 years old, he framed his first house with borrowed tools and an old pickup truck. By the time he was 50, his company had built hundreds of homes across the valley. People respected him. Not because he was rich. Because he kept his word. If George Carter shook your hand, you could trust him. That was worth more than money. I grew up in his office. Every summer, I sat behind an old metal desk helping him organize receipts and invoices. The place always smelled like sawdust. Even now, years later, that smell reminds me of him. Grandpa taught me how to manage money. He taught me how to read financial records. But more than that, he taught me something else. Measure twice, he always said. Trust carefully. When he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, everything changed. The strong man who built houses with his bare hands started struggling to hold a spoon. His hands shook. His voice became softer. Walking became harder. And while everyone else slowly disappeared from his life, I stayed. For 3 years. Every morning before work, I drove to his house. I helped him eat. I organized his medications. I paid his bills. I balanced his accounts. I read the newspaper to him while he rested in his chair. My parents were always too busy. At least that's what they claimed. My mother, Patricia, rarely visited. My father, Daniel, showed up sometimes. Usually on Sundays. Usually for only a few minutes. He never stayed long. The truth was simple. Grandpa needed help. And I was the only one there. 3 years passed like that. 3 long years. Then one day, everything ended. The day before Grandpa died, he called me into his workshop. By then he was using a wheelchair. His hands trembled badly. But his eyes were still sharp. Still watching everything. He pulled a silver pocket watch from his shirt pocket. The watch was old and worn smooth from decades of use. He placed it in my hand. Keep time for me, kiddo. I tried not to cry. I knew what that gift meant. The next morning, he was gone. The funeral was held 3 days later. More than 200 people came. Old construction workers. Neighbors. Friends. Business owners. People whose lives Grandpa had touched. The church was packed. I sat quietly in the 3rd row. Not the 1st row. My mother had arranged the seating. She stood at the front dressed in black, greeting people as if she had been the one taking care of Grandpa. People hugged her. Praised her. Comforted her. I watched in silence. My father stood beside her looking uncomfortable. Like he wanted to be somewhere else. My cousin Jason arrived wearing an expensive suit. He walked around shaking hands and smiling. Already acting like he owned everything. Nobody asked me to speak. Nobody mentioned the 3 years I spent caring for Grandpa. Nobody mentioned the sacrifices. Nobody mentioned the nights I stayed awake helping him through pain. After the service, everyone moved downstairs for food. People drank coffee. They shared memories. They said all the usual things people say after funerals. He lived a good life. He's in a better place. He's finally at peace. I was standing near the coffee machine when I heard my mother talking. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't trying to hide it. George only felt sorry for Emma, she told a neighbor. That's why she was always around. The words hit me hard. But I didn't react. I simply wrapped my hand around Grandpa's pocket watch. And stayed quiet. 10 minutes later, Jason found me. He placed a hand on my shoulder. The fake smile never left his face. You should probably collect your things from the house, he said. The family has plans. Plans. Grandpa hadn't even been buried for 24 hours. 2 days later, I drove back to the house. The new lock was already installed. My mother stood on the porch beside a cardboard box. She smiled when she saw me. Not a warm smile. The kind of smile someone gives when they already know they've won. I packed your things. She pushed the box toward me. Inside were a few clothes. Some notebooks. A couple of old books. And my cedar chest. Nothing else. I stared at her. What about the rest of my things? There isn't anything else. Behind the screen door, my father stood holding a coffee mug. His hands shook. But not from age. Not from grief. Something else. Something I couldn't understand yet. He wouldn't even look at me. Across the street, an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Wilson was watering flowers. She stopped and watched the entire scene. I could tell she felt terrible. But she said nothing. I picked up the box. Lifted the cedar chest. And walked away. My mother never tried to stop me. Never apologized. Never looked guilty. I loaded everything into my car and drove back to my tiny apartment. 600 square feet above a dry cleaning shop. Not much. But it was mine. When I got home, I noticed a missed call from a number I didn't recognize. No voicemail. Just a missed call. I stared at it for a long moment. Because 6 months earlier, Grandpa had told me something important. Something nobody else knew. 6 months before his death, he had called me into his workshop. His voice had been serious. Listen carefully. I sat beside him. He looked around the room before speaking. Don't tell anyone this. Then he told me about the trust. $20 million. Investments. Properties. Savings. Everything he had built over a lifetime. My mouth literally fell open. $20 million. I couldn't believe it. He smiled softly. I worked my whole life for it. I tried to protest. Tried to tell him he didn't need to do that. He raised a trembling hand. No. His voice was firm. You're the only one who earned it. I remember tears filling my eyes. But then he said something strange. There is more. What do you mean? You'll understand later. I asked questions. Lots of questions. But he wouldn't explain. Instead, he gave me one instruction. Wait. That was all. Wait. And now, sitting alone in my apartment after being thrown out of his house, I remembered those words. Wait. The trust was safe. Nobody could touch it. But what was the rest? What else had Grandpa been hiding? I didn't know. So I waited. 3 days after the funeral, my mother filed paperwork claiming Grandpa had died without a valid will. She swore under oath that no trust existed. No other documents existed. Nothing. My father signed the papers too. Meanwhile, Jason began working on property transfers. I didn't know it yet. But land was already being moved into family names. The stealing had started. Mrs. Wilson called me one evening. Her voice sounded worried. Honey, I think you need to know something. My stomach tightened. What happened? I saw your mother at the courthouse. That was enough. I knew exactly what was happening. I sat at my kitchen table after hanging up. Thinking. Watching. Waiting. Every instinct told me to hire a lawyer immediately. Every instinct told me to fight. But Grandpa's last instruction echoed in my head. Wait. 5 days passed. Then 6. On the 7th day, my phone finally rang. The same number. This time I answered. A calm female voice spoke. Emma, this is Rebecca Morgan. My heart started racing. She was Grandpa's attorney. And the moment I heard her voice, I knew everything was about to change. The next morning, I left before sunrise. The cedar chest sat on the passenger seat beside me. I drove nearly 3 hours to meet Rebecca Morgan, the attorney Grandpa had trusted for years. The entire drive, my mind raced. Why had Grandpa waited 7 days? What was so important? And what had he meant when he said there was more? By the time I arrived, my stomach was tied in knots. Rebecca's office sat inside an old brick building downtown. When I walked in, she greeted me warmly. I'm sorry for your loss, Emma. I nodded. Thank you. She led me into a conference room and placed 2 thick folders on the table. Then she looked directly at me. Your grandfather prepared for this. I felt my heart skip. What do you mean? Rebecca opened the first folder. 2 years before his death, George hired a forensic accountant. I frowned. A forensic accountant? Someone who investigates financial fraud. Suddenly I sat up straighter. Fraud. The word sounded dangerous. Rebecca pushed the report toward me. I opened it. And within seconds, my blood ran cold. There were pages of bank records. Transfers. Withdrawals. Fake invoices. Fake companies. Dozens of suspicious transactions. The deeper I read, the worse it became. My mother hadn't just stolen money. She had built an entire system. Over nearly 3 years, she had quietly taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from Grandpa. Small amounts. Carefully hidden. Amounts designed not to attract attention. The total was over $400,000. I looked up slowly. She stole all this? Rebecca nodded. Your grandfather knew. I felt sick. For years, I had believed my mother was selfish. But this was something else. This was calculated. Planned. Cruel. Rebecca opened the second folder. There's something else. I braced myself. Nothing could surprise me anymore. At least that's what I thought. Then she slid a DNA report across the table. I stared at it. Confused. What is this? Rebecca folded her hands. 18 months before he died, your grandfather ordered a DNA test. My chest tightened. The room suddenly felt smaller. I looked down and read the report. Then I read it again. And again. Because my brain refused to accept the words. My father, Daniel Carter, was not George Carter's biological son. I couldn't breathe. For several seconds, I simply stared at the paper. This can't be right. Rebecca's voice remained calm. It is. I shook my head. No. Your grandmother was pregnant before she married George. The room became silent. George knew the truth. I looked up. He knew? From the beginning. My eyes filled with tears. All these years. All these decades. And Grandpa had never treated my father differently. Not once. He chose to raise him. The words hit me hard. He chose him. That was who Grandpa was. He didn't love people because of blood. He loved them because they were family. Rebecca continued. Your father learned the truth when he was 18. I swallowed. And my mother? She knew too. Everything suddenly made sense. The fear. The guilt. The strange look on Dad's face. Mom had been using that secret against him for years. Every time he questioned her. Every time he hesitated. Every time he tried to stand up to her. She reminded him he wasn't really George's son. And he gave in. Again and again. I felt angry. Heartbroken. And strangely sad for my father all at once. Rebecca looked at the cedar chest. Did George tell you to bring that? I nodded. She smiled. Good. Then she said something that shocked me. Check the bottom. That night, I returned home. I carried the chest into my apartment. Placed it carefully on my bed. And opened it. Inside were old memories. Photos. School papers. Childhood treasures. I removed everything. Then I examined the bottom. At first, I saw nothing. But eventually I found a tiny seam hidden in the wood. My pulse quickened. I pressed down. The panel moved. A hidden compartment. Inside were only two things. A brass key. And an envelope sealed with red wax. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a short note written by Grandpa. His familiar handwriting instantly brought tears to my eyes. It contained only one instruction. Bank Box 1147. Use the key. That was it. No explanation. No details. Just directions. Exactly the way Grandpa always did things. The next morning, I drove to the bank. The key fit perfectly. Inside the safety deposit box was another envelope. And what I found inside changed everything. The original trust documents. The DNA report. And a handwritten letter from Grandpa. I sat alone in a private room and read every word. By the time I finished, I was crying. Grandpa explained everything. He wrote about my grandmother. About raising my father. About choosing love over pride. Then he wrote about my mother. About watching her steal. Watching her manipulate. Watching her destroy everything he built. He admitted something painful. He had wanted to stop her sooner. But he was afraid. Afraid that forcing my father to choose between his wife and his father would destroy him. So instead, Grandpa chose another path. He protected me. At the bottom of the letter was a sentence I would never forget. Blood doesn't make you family. What you do when nobody is watching does. I read those words 3 times. Then carefully folded the letter. For the first time, I truly understood what Grandpa had been trying to tell me. This wasn't about money. It was about truth. And truth was finally catching up with my family. Rebecca introduced me to a powerful estate attorney named Diane Parker. Together, we prepared for court. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records. Forged signatures. Fake invoices. Property transfers. Witness statements. DNA reports. Handwriting experts. Everything. The deeper we investigated, the uglier the story became. My mother had forged Grandpa's signature. My cousin Jason had helped transfer property. A notary had approved documents illegally. Every trail led back to the same people. And every piece of evidence made their situation worse. One afternoon, I visited my father. He sat alone inside Grandpa's old office. An empty beer bottle rested beside him. The room looked tired. Just like he did. I know about the transfers, I said. He stared at the floor. For a long time, he said nothing. Finally he spoke. I signed papers. My chest tightened. Did you know what they were? He looked away. I didn't ask. That answer hurt more than a lie. Because it was true. He hadn't fought. He hadn't questioned anything. He had simply looked away. Just like he always had. I left feeling heavier than before. The court hearing arrived a few weeks later. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors. Reporters. Former employees. Everyone wanted answers. My mother sat beside her attorney. Perfect makeup. Perfect clothes. Perfect fake smile. But I could see the fear hiding behind her eyes. The hearing lasted hours. One witness after another testified. The forensic accountant explained the stolen money. The handwriting expert proved signatures were forged. The bank records showed every transfer. The notary admitted what happened. One by one, the lies collapsed. Then Diane introduced the DNA report. The entire courtroom became silent. You could hear people breathing. Nothing else. My father sat motionless. His face pale. His hands flat on the table. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Dad whispered something. So quietly that everyone leaned forward. He knew. Tears filled his eyes. He always knew. The room remained silent. And suddenly I understood. For decades, my father had carried that secret. The fear. The shame. The uncertainty. And through all of it, Grandpa had loved him anyway. Not because he had to. Because he wanted to. My mother grabbed his arm. Stop talking. But the damage was done. The truth was out. And there was no putting it back. Finally, the judge delivered her ruling. The trust was valid. The stolen property transfers were void. The forged documents were invalid. All stolen funds had to be returned. And criminal charges would move forward. My mother lost everything. Jason lost everything. Their entire scheme collapsed in a single afternoon. Outside the courthouse, Dad stopped me. His eyes were red. I signed everything. His voice broke. I was scared. I nodded. I know. He always knew. I looked at him. Yes. Tears streamed down his face. And he still called me his son. I couldn't answer. Because my throat had closed. For the first time in my life, I saw my father cry. Really cry. Not for himself. For Grandpa. For the love he had wasted. For the courage he never found. Months later, the criminal cases ended. My mother accepted a plea deal. Jason lost his real estate license. The notary lost his certification. Dad cooperated with investigators and avoided charges. Then he filed for divorce. I never moved into Grandpa's house. Instead, I stayed in my little apartment. The same apartment above the dry cleaner. It reminded me who I was before all this happened. 6 months later, I used part of the trust to create the George Carter Foundation. Its purpose was simple. Helping young people learn skilled trades. Carpentry. Electrical work. Plumbing. The kind of work Grandpa respected. The first year, 8 students received scholarships. The foundation office was located inside Grandpa's old workshop. I renovated most of it. But I left one wall untouched. The old wood remained exactly as Grandpa left it. Covered in tiny scratches. Still smelling faintly of sawdust. Mrs. Wilson attended the grand opening. She brought homemade peach pie. Just like she always did. She looked around the workshop and smiled. George would be proud. I laughed softly. He'd probably tell me I spent too much on renovations. She laughed too. And for a moment, it felt like Grandpa was still there. Today, the silver pocket watch sits on my desk. The cedar chest sits on a shelf behind me. Both reminders of the man who changed my life. People think I inherited $20 million. But they're wrong. What Grandpa really left me was something much more valuable. A standard. A lesson. A way of living. Because in the end, he was right. Blood doesn't make you family. What you do when nobody is watching does. And that is the legacy George Carter left behind.